most of the subscribers on this channel, I think it's fair to say, come at the content from a very spiritual orientated perspective. So most of the people on the channel that are subscribed and find, thank you very much, JF, wonderful, good man. Most of the people find the content and come at it all through meditation, and obviously we stress meditation and mindfulness as part of the way to get dowsing effectively. Some of you are a little bit more scientifically orientated, but it's very clear from the numbers, the viewing numbers of who's hit that latest video, that really the scientific stuff doesn't actually interest you that much. Perhaps, I don't know, or maybe it's just an aberration of the algorithm on YouTube. I don't know, but I personally find the scientific perspective on the experiences that we have from our spiritual perspective as we go through this life, go through this reality, I find the scientific perspective absolutely fascinating. And as David said, it is a bit brain bending when you're trying to keep up with somebody that is very across the whole scientific perspective of looking at reality. But what's great about it, I feel, and why I'm urging you, if you haven't already watched it, at some point after the live or the next few days to watch it, is because it's rather like watching something like that and hearing somebody that's an expert in their field, as Ian is. He was actually taught by a fellow called David Bohm, who was a leading quantum physicist, sort of in the, I guess, in sort of the second wave of quantum physicists, if we think of Einstein and Niels Bohr and people like that, whose names I forget, around the turn of the century, making the big waves to start with. And there are other people like David Bohm that came along a little bit later. And a lot of these scientists were, despite their logical approach, or maybe even because of it, because of what they were able to do in terms of actually relating to their realities and trying to understand it, a lot of these scientists were actually very spiritual people, which often comes as a surprise, and it is fascinating. So to get to the point that I was trying to make is that when you listen to somebody like Ian, even if science isn't your thing, what it does is it obviously gets the old cogs working, and it does sort of take your perceptions of how you think about yourself and how you think about reality and all the daily stuff that we might get bogged down in. And not only does it put that daily stuff well and truly into perspective, because we're talking about concepts that are far, massive concepts of the meaning of life, really. So it really does put the little day-to-day stuff into perspective. But it also, more importantly, it allows you to shift your perspective, shift your focus on everything, I mean, pull your perspective right out and look somewhere else. It's like you thought that you understood who you were and what you're capable of as a human being. No. It's completely different, because actually science says there's far more to you than actually we even knew for all these hundreds and hundreds of years, if we take linear time as existing. So part of this, he says, Ian is saying, right. So on this, he was talking about the ways that we optically process information about our seeming external reality, right? So he says the eye, it actually forms a hologram. So the image that we're taking up actually forms a hologram on the surface of the eye. And the brain extracts from it a two-dimensional layer of information. The eye creates a representation of that information to the best of its ability, combined with other senses of space and time. So Ian's saying, you actually get a hologram on the surface of the eye and extracts from it a two-dimensional layer of information. So that hologram is a two-dimensional layer of information. The eye creates a representation of that information to the best of its ability, combined with the other senses of space and time. And it also integrates with time. It creates a representation in the brain, which is only one way of looking at it, which is consistent. But they're not the real reality. So what he's saying is that the brain is processing the two-dimensional hologram that's on the eye, arrives at the eye. The brain pulls information out of that hologram, but it's not the real reality. It's interpreting within the brain. we project it outwards. So that's the idea, because we're working with space-time. There's actually a holistic universe out there, but our senses, remember, it comes as a whole. So the universe, the image, the information on the eye comes at, everything's there, all the information is there, a hologram, but we, out of our senses, create a space-time out of it. That's one of the most recent ideas in physics, the holographic model. And he pointed out that I was asking him a question. When I say about people having their own worlds and living in their own worlds and working by their own rules within those worlds, he was explaining to me that in talking about it in that sense, I'm still working with a space-time framework, but from a scientific point of view, all of the information is there and we extrapolate out of that information. Yes, exactly, Robin. That's exactly it. That is precisely it, because he goes on. So if you have a hologram, if you break a little piece of the hologram film, you shine a light, you get the whole image. This is the nature of a hologram, is that when you break a hologram, you can see the whole hologram in a little piece of broken hologram, right? Of that broken piece. So what he's saying is it's exactly the same. If you break a little piece of the hologram film, you shine a light, you get the whole image. Each little piece of the hologram is a separate consciousness, but we're all part of that one consciousness. So we all view it like a mountain has many sides. Now this saying of the mountain having many sides is an ancient saying in Eastern philosophy. We're all viewing the same mountain. We might have different views of the mountain. We might have different views of the hologram. It's the Eastern religion thing about 10,000 jewels, 10,000 being a number in ancient thinking just means everything, because it's a massive number in those days. So if you shine a light in a room of 1,000 jewels, 10,000 jewels, you'll see everything if you shine a light into that room, because the reflections are echoed everywhere, right? So that's the thinking. So when they talk about the universe being 10,000 jewels, it's like a hologram, which is what Robin is saying. So if you look at the mountain from many different sides, then each one of us looks at the same mountain, but we're seeing a different perspective. Each one of us with a life experiences looks at the same thing, but sees something different. Okay? Bearing in mind all of this stuff that is in that two-dimensional hologram on the eyeball comes out of the quantum soup of possibility. So don't forget that. We're still part of that quantum soup. Yeah, I mean, and actually he goes on. I haven't got much more to say on that for this group now. Watch the video, because actually he just goes on to say the hole in your eye converts the hologram into a space. Let's just say a space representation in the back of your retina. What it does a one-to-one correspondence, and you see in your retina what is supposedly out there, but it's actually abstracting some of the information from the world outside. And he goes on that David Bohm, in other words, his teacher, pointed out that if it wasn't for lenses in our eyes and telescopes and things like that, we wouldn't see the universe as we see it. We've evolved to see it in space and time, right? And that's the last thing. And that's where the transcript ends. And I'm very grateful to that person that transcribed it and commented on the video. So when Ian was trying to get me to think and to illustrate the fact that we are not separate, from the soup that we are created from, and we are not separate from each other. Okay, so and we know this in spiritual terms. We always say it. We've said it so many times on a Monday afternoon, but that, to me, it really, and that conversation really helped to solidify some of these thoughts in my mind, because I don't know about you, but I find that I can kind of go, yeah, I get that, yeah, I get that, yeah, I understand that, we're all one, we're all that. And sometimes you can experience it, obviously if we go into the lovely meditations and we get to that state of oneness and we feel that, and the first time it happens, it's a bit of a shock. Well, I thought it was. And then you go, oh yeah, that was fantastic. That was a real wow. And then you get on with your life and you forget these things again. And for me, and it might be just, based on my sort of practical outlook on life, I suppose, but that's why I find something like that comes up and is described like that, it kind of goes like, yes, of course, that's exactly why we're all connected and we're all one. The other thing that was really, really interesting and helped me go, aha, yes, of course, was how Ian described this very thing that Anna has mentioned here. We're all vibrational beings in the quantum field. Because what Ian went on to talk about was the fact that we have evolved space-time. So we exist emanating from the quantum field of existence of all things. We've evolved as beings, physical beings, that utilize the facet of the quantum soup of possibility in a manner that sits upon space and time. And what he said, which is obvious really, and which I think we've discussed in different terms in the past, is that there's nothing to say, and there's nothing to say in science, that there aren't other beings, there aren't other evolved beings within that emanate from the quantum soup that actually experience and have evolved to experience reality emanating from the quantum soup without space-time as their processing mechanism, right? Okay, so I love that, because what it said to me, and it didn't drop when I was speaking to him, the penny didn't drop, but what it made almost tangible for me was, well, of course, so what are angels and archangels? They all emanate from the quantum field of possibility, and they are processing their experience from a different perspective of space-time. They have the ability to interact with space-time because they interact with us. And and equally, we probably have an ability to interact with things on a non-space-time. Now, of course, we know in the spiritual experience that we do and can interact with everything on a non-space-time basis. When we start to look at, and I guess all it's doing is saying to my practical mind, well, how does this work? And to me, it offers a solution of how maybe we can interact with these angels and archangels. And to me, when the penny dropped, when I was editing the video, tightening up a little bit, it was like, well, of course. It's so simple. It's not about leaving things behind, leaving people behind, or leaving any aspect of this vibrational quantum soup behind. But the truth of be the change you want to be is that as you be the change and you step into that new vibrational frequency, as you know, this is classic Joe Dispenza work, all of you will recognize this. You emit the new frequency and everything else changes with it. But it's not a negative but. There are always aspects of reality, no matter how high we take our vibration or want to take our vibration. If we want to live at the highest of the high vibrational levels and be communicating with archangels all day long, then that's great. But we won't be here in a three-dimensional space because we can't sustain that. I would dispute that even the Dalai Lama or any great Buddhist monk. Now, I know you're probably all going, oh, I don't agree with that. But given the system we've got at the moment, that's my stand. I suspect that, there might be one or two great yogis and one or two great, fantastic, amazing practitioners, perhaps, that can sustain it and remain in a physical form. But what I'm getting at, where I'm going with this, and being a little bit cheeky with it at the same time, where I'm going with this is that there's always going to be downsides. We're not able to sustain that amazing connection all the time. Most of the time, most of us can't. So, and when we hit one of these kind of little dips in the vibrational field, or in our vibrational awareness, or just in the nature of what we're living through, then we may feel that, or we may experience that as like, okay, so we do something stupid, we do something that we regret, and it's very easy because of our human conditioning to then use that instance, that little, should we say, that little trip up of wrongdoing. Let's just say it's a wrongdoing. It doesn't matter whether it was said or behavior, and it doesn't matter how wrong it was, right? It's just, we'll just take this little example because, and you'll see where I'm going with it in a minute, because it's very easy with our human conditioning and all of our human side, all of those things that make me as Tim, all of those things of ego, you know, and we accept that ego still exists. You know, I say we still go through most of our life with the ego to varying degrees. Obviously, we try to reduce its influence upon us if we're following that spiritual path. But all of those things that make me, and usually these are things that are trying to stop us follow the spiritual path because they want us to remain unchanged. They will jump on that opportunity of wrongdoing, that wrongdoing incident, and say, see, told you, yeah, you're not as great as you think you are, or you're not, you know, what do you think you're doing saying that, or, you know, why did you say that? And then you get things like guilt coming in and regret coming in, and you get tied up in all this low vibration, which is just because you're listening to the bad guys. Whereas all of those little moments of dips of like where we behave like an idiot. I was going to put a word in there before I said idiot, but where we behave like an idiot, we do the wrongdoing. We do that. We say something that's silly, or we think we've said something silly, or we do something that we regret, an action that we regret. It's all as it should be, because we don't know the bigger picture. We never see the bigger picture. We never see any good that happens from what we said or what we did. We never see how it actually truly affects another person. Now, obviously, if we're talking about dropping an atomic bomb, then clearly we see the effect. I'm talking about one-to-one or group interaction of people on the emotional levels. So really, I suppose I'm talking about quite small little things within life. I'm not talking about major global events. And I'm not talking about political events. I'm talking about one-to-one interaction between ordinary, decent human beings trying to get by in life and improving their lot. And when you make a cock up, just by being human, you don't see the effect on the person, where the person goes, oh, let me just think about what's happened here, and actually uses that interaction to improve their own understanding of themselves. So when we say that everything happens for a reason and everything is occurring at the right time at the right place, you could be jolly sure that it is. And so as long as we can justify and understand the motivation that made us do that wrongdoing in the first place, which is usually just a silly human thing, and it might be, you know, you're doing your own work and it just is not, it just leads to something, you know, then that's okay, because there's no need to ever beat ourselves up about being a bit silly or a bit stupid. Every interaction has two sides. It has the positive and the negative. We live in this duality. If the recipient is not in the space where they are able and open to perceive the growth or the learning opportunity at that time, then yeah, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And in fact, to be honest, it's going to hurt anyway, even if you can learn from it. But yeah, I mean, okay. So I think we covered that off. But I think that part of the sort of link there from Ian's conversation about the whole kind of hologram on there being interconnected, cascaded down to our one-to-one reality, where we everything, there's bigger picture there, the bigger picture. We're just playing out our roles, and actually we're always doing what we need to be doing. So but yeah, we can beat ourselves up. And in that process of beating ourselves up, that's what we're supposed to be doing at that time, is beating ourselves up. Why? I don't know. But if it leads to a progression or a thought or a realization or a penny drop moment, that means that we have in that moment a process of change, then that's why. And do you know what? It was actually, I've written down something on these notes. I was talking to somebody just this morning, and we were talking about the fact that change, we've already mentioned today, change in oneself is so difficult to achieve. And especially when we're talking about these sort of concepts, where we're talking about shifting our perception to enable us to see a new perspective on stuff that enables us to see that actually we can leave it alone and move on, and therefore change. And what the conversation was this morning was that change is really difficult. But actually this guy said, well, Tim, you've heard this saying by Tony Robbins being this super coach guy. Tony Robbins, he said, change is easy. He said, change happens. Tony Robbins says, change happens in a moment, but it takes an age to wait for the moment of change. And that's the point, is that this is why change in ourselves takes so long, because it's not because the moment of change is lengthy, it's because it takes so long for us to see the point of change and then change. We observe our performance unless we're in the flow and in the zone and in that space of being really tuned in and loving that link and connection to the management, which I know some of you are really capable of just slipping in there and living life from that perspective for a lot of the time. But if we're not, then we're judging ourselves. We are bringing comment and listening to the bad guys, as we said. And that leads us into this whole thing about trust and faith. And that's the topic that we're going to end on, trust and faith. We're talking about trust and faith in the management and in the rightness of everything. So this big spiritual platitude that's always bounced around of like everything happens at the right time. I said it myself earlier, everything happens as appropriate, even the wrongdoings. But when we're not in the flow and we're not feeling that connection, and we're feeling the frustration of life instead of this perceived separate experience of living as a human being, then that's when we doubt and we experience a lack of trust and faith. Somebody asked me fairly recently about how do I develop the faith to know that everything is all right. And I don't think I can answer that for that person. I think I can only answer that for myself, because I personally feel that is the nature of faith, is that it is, I don't think that faith, which is, to me, is built upon trust. You have to have trust before you can have faith. To me, that's the way I read it. I don't think that can be taught. I think that has to be learned. And if one is looking for faith in the support from the spiritual aspect or the spiritual way of living, then if you're looking for it, then you haven't got it. Then you've formed a blockage. There is a blockage preventing you at that state. If you're looking for, I want to have the faith to be able to do X, Y, Z. If you want to use it as a support, as an assistance to go through life, then if you're looking for it, then clearly you haven't got it. And that's not to say it's derogatory. This is not a comment or a judgment. This is just an observation of the way that I see it. And I think that being asked to have trust and to have faith is one of the hardest things, of course. And this is why it's always spirit banging on about trust and faith. Spirit is always banging on about it. You know, Spirit will always say to you, and you're dowsing, when you do dowsing and you ask about this stuff, you probably just get trust coming through to you, and you probably go, well, yes, I know that, but and the only way that you can develop trust in the spiritual sense, or if we talk about specifically dowsing, then it is by doing the dowsing and by trying to build and trying to work, I'm saying trying, because I feel that there's so much frustration around it. And doing the dowsing and building one step at a time. I'm gonna have some more tea. One step at a time, that trust. And then you see, then it's because then you're building your confidence in yourself. But sometimes it's not about your own confidence. It's not about the fact that you're incapable of doing something. It's about you just not seeing, which is confidence. But in fact, you can't see that you can do it. Just try to work with upstairs and try to work differently, perhaps. Just try to work differently to change the way that you're doing it, because in that classic old way, hang on, I've got to come back to that in a second. In that classic old way, if we don't change anything, then nothing changes. So try it and then work at it.